Where are we now? Why are ecosystem services important? You've heard a lot about that today. How do we get there? How do we mobilize? You heard about Costa Rica. You know, they've got a national tax. Where are we? So I want to talk about funding mechanisms, some of the pros and cons, give you some examples of what's going on in this country. Yes, we do have examples. We heard from Monica of the good work going on in terms of enumerating those services, but what about getting the payments out there? And then where do we need to go from here? Some ideas about more communication, getting access to different funds, et cetera. Here's my egg. Economists tend to put the environment in a separate bubble. Those of you in the room know that that's just really stupid. The economy doesn't live outside the environment. The environment is the thing that nurtures the economy. So, you know, it's time we got the picture better in terms of communicating what's going on. And, you know, the messaging is important. I have grandchildren. And I really care about my grandkids. I don't want them to grow up. I want them to have the same things I had. And, you know, that message certainly resonates with me, and I'm sure everyone in the room. The whole notion of natural capital, which you heard about from our friends from Europe, is protecting those services, protecting the ability of our natural environment to continue to sustain those over time. It's astounding to me that other people don't get it. I mean, we're talking to you folks in the room who do, but we need a mechanism to get that message out to everyone. So what do I think we need to be talking about? And I have some high-level objectives, which I then want to think about weaving them into specific programs. So what do we need? We need more than one-off things. We need a roadmap. We need a way to have a systemic type of policy that protects and restores our ecosystem services. We need to move it from the local level, which was the starting point, from the ground up, but we need to have a landscape scale where we embed ecosystem services along with our economic and our social things. And you heard about it from the other speakers in Costa Rica, where you think about it as a whole cultural component. But there, I am an economist, and I have to talk about bottom lines. So we have to have policies that are smart, that are cost effective, that deliver the outcomes we want as cheaply as possible. We don't want to spend people's money in a way that is wasteful. And if you've started to hear about our political leaders working toward the next election here in BC, the word affordability comes out of our premier's mouth quite frequently. So how do we turn that into something positive to say, you cannot afford not to do this? We'll talk about that. And there's no one size fits all. We need multiple policies. Why is it tough? I mean, we get it. Why do other people not get it? We use markets all the time. And we use markets to allocate things that are scarce. Well, our natural environment's scarce. Our ecosystem services are scarce. Why don't people get it? Well, a lot of people don't think they're that scarce. They look out, they see beautiful landscapes, and they don't appreciate. So that's why a lot of the bottom-up stuff is so important, to show that there are real trade-offs there. They don't know what we're losing. They don't know what we could gain. The draining of a wetland is not seen by most people outside of the folks who know what's going on as an issue to even worry about. There's also this little problem we call in economics free riding. And that says is, if you're going to pay for it, why should I? Okay? How do we get people to say we all have to be in this together to pay, or we're not going to get what we want? Some issues about property rights, who has the right to do things, and the famous, I don't care about tomorrow. But, you know, as I said, my grandkids, I care. Most people have either a parent or a child or something. We got to get that message out as well. So, what are some of the principles? Understand the linkages. You heard that from Monica. You saw that in the Costa Rica. You heard about it from Teeb. We have got that information. We have to be able to communicate it. We have to align the ecosystem characteristics with the scale of the projects, and I'll talk a little bit more about that specifically. And we do have to have this accounting that makes sense, that we're paying for the services that we shouldn't already be doing on our own. And some of it is just good farm management, which you all practice. Some of it is incremental, and that's where the payments come in. So I've got a really crucial component of this is to build trust and credibility. And I think a lot of the programs that are going on are helping to do that. What we need to do is take it to the next level. So the standard approach we've been doing is regulation. We've got the ALR to protect land. We've got land set aside as protected areas. And we've got other things, which I'm going to call process regulation, or the STICs, which are regulations for manure management, other kinds of waste management programs, laws about setbacks, et cetera, to protect riparian areas. What we're talking about in payments for ecosystem services is the next slide. And that's both voluntary and mandatory programs. We don't have many mandatory programs, not in this country, but the voluntary ones are the ones I'm going to give you examples of. These are using the market to auction off payments for ecosystem services. I'm going to talk about offset markets. I think there's a much bigger opportunity than we've capitalized on before. Things like conservation banks, which are putting nature into storing it just like a bank for future services. Voluntary programs like eco-gifts and property tax credits and conservation easements. As I said, there are some jurisdictions that have mandatory programs where you have to pay to not protect the environment, and we just have not made use of those very much, if at all, in this country. So here are the examples I'm going to talk about here. Voluntary participation, the legislative one, the only real one I can talk about is sort of a quasi-legislated but also voluntary, and that's offset programs. But I'm going to define each of these through examples, so I'm not going to go through and give you the gory details of what all of these programs mean. So let me turn to the examples. First of all is not an example of an explicit payment program, but a data gathering program. And our neighbors to the east, Alberta, have been doing a lot of this. I'd like to see more of it in British Columbia in a systemic way. Again, Monica talked about all the detail going in several different farms, but mapping the ecosystem services, we now have greater tools to do this. Landsat, mapping data. Going in Alberta, they're getting down to the pixels, and they can talk about what is on the earth. Where are these resources? Why is this important? And here's some examples: water purification, forest, rangeland, pollination services. This is important because it sets both a baseline, and it also allows the ongoing monitoring and verification of what's going on. It also helps in the communication to say to people, okay, I'm going to do this assessment of where we are today. Let's do it in 2 years or 5 years. In some cases, they're going back in time to show the change in the ecosystem services. And as you saw with the Costa Rican slide, the bare mountains versus the kids on the horses going through the water, I mean, what landscape do you want to see? That helps in the communication, it helps in the monitoring, and it helps in the verification of the kinds of systems we're using. So those are just some examples in Alberta: grassland vegetation, wetland soils. These are measurement activities going on, which our governments should be doing, not just you in the private sector and me in the academic sector. So let me talk about one of the programs that has paid farmers to reduce greenhouse gases, and that's the special greenhouse gas emitters regulation, which was the Alberta policy until Premier Notley announced a new carbon policy. It required large emitters of CO2 to reduce their emissions. One of the ways they could show that they were not having as much damage is to purchase an offset. An offset is a verifiable thing that says we are sequestering more carbon into the landscape or the water or wherever it's going. This is additional, so for every ton that you're putting out of your coal-fired power plant, I am afforesting, I am creating new forests, I am doing manure management, I am creating other sorts on ag lands to offset that ton of carbon. Interestingly, in Alberta, and I don't have the most recent data, I couldn't find it, that up to 40% of all the offsets sold in Alberta for carbon have been to agriculture. So I'm going to come at the end to new opportunities, but I want you to remember this one because I think it's an untapped source of probably money for the next 40 or 50 years if we last that long. And the amounts are 100 to 140 million over this time, and some people may say that's not a big amount, we could do better. But 140 million to protect ecosystem services is not to be dismissed. And those are just some of the examples: cropping, livestock, and energy management. We don't have an offset program in BC that is explicitly tied to emissions. We do have some offsets, but our big emitters, the large-scale emitters, not you and me when we buy gasoline or diesel, we don't have an equivalent kind of program. Should we be looking at one in BC? We also have other voluntary offsets, people that can set aside, that can do ecosystem enhancing activities for payments. So again, this is in Alberta where, to protect some species at risk, people have protected the grasslands to plant native perennial species, which is offsetting activities elsewhere. So developers are saying, I'm going to pave over this landscape, put in a bunch of new housing, and in return for that, we're going to increase the ecosystem services on other land. So again, think about it in the context of Greater Vancouver. What are we doing? Well, we're building like crazy. Stresses to the ALR, stresses to other things. Why don't we have a program that involves offsets of some sort? Good question, I think. Grassland Banking. These are, again, voluntary programs. Nature Conservancy of Canada is one of the funders of this. There are other funders, some in the room, like the Real Estate Foundation, of these kinds of programs. But what they're doing, I think, is really interesting, and that is, again, setting aside land, not taking it out of the productive base for agriculture, but managing it in a way, again, that protects the grassland. We've got to get the story out. We are sustaining jobs, we are sustaining nature, we are sustaining food quality, we are protecting Canadian security. I want to see the video, I want to see the propaganda, the good propaganda that gets out there and makes all these links. I can't do it, I don't have talent, but there are people out there that you could capitalize on, and I'd be happy to put you in touch with a bunch of students that would like to do this sort of thing. Finally, the engagement, back to the personal level. The funders, the farmers, and the stewardship groups. These are all fundamental. These are the groups that have been working on it. These are the groups that have been putting tireless effort into it and getting those messages out. We've got the proof of concept. What we've got to do is scale it up. And I wish you the best this afternoon to solve all these problems that I've left you with. And I will leave you with one quote. This was about the financial crisis. And basically it says, we have a habit to wait until it's too late. And when it's too late, it costs us a heck of a lot more than if we start doing it now. So thinking about all the inspirational stuff you've heard from other parts of the world, let's capitalize that, get moving, get our story out, and I think we can get these programs up from pilots to practice. Thanks very much.